How's it going, guys? It's Poetry Said, and welcome to a combat guide I'm going to be doing with you guys. Combat guides are kind of like one of the guides that people always ask for, and that is commonly searched for. So I decided to do my own combat guide to kind of explain to you guys the basics. And as all my guides are, I'm not going to be super in-depth. I'm not going to tell you all the algorithms and stuff, because lots of them aren't even known for combat, which is interesting. But I'm going to be covering the basics, and I'm going to try to make this as comprehensible as possible. I want it to be understandable, not necessarily super detailed. So just be prepared for that. If you're looking for someone to explain the code to you, I'm not going to be that person, but I will explain to you what really matters when you're going into battle and when you're setting up your armies. Alright, so we're playing as England. I played a year exactly. Well, actually, 11th of November is when a year would be. And the reason for this is I wanted to make sure that we could actually declare on someone right away. The reason being that I want to show you guys the actual war. So let's go ahead and fabricate on Scotland and get to war with them before I even do anything. That's gonna be important. I don't care about the save file. I don't care if we lose. We are going to lose, like in the long run against France, but that's okay. I mostly just want to show you guys the combat. We'll go ahead and put a general in charge. But before we even do our first battle, I want to talk to you guys about what are the basics and stuff. And lots of this can be found in the military screen. So the first thing to understand is, well, actually, you know what, let's go to the technology screen, because this is where you kind of see a lot more. So the first thing to understand is that you have your basic level of stuff, and that's all determined by your technology and stuff. And later on, you'll get modifiers from ideas. For instance, like quality ideas are really good, quantity ideas are really good, offensive, aristocratic. There's a whole bunch of ideas that can really modify things, as well as your national ideas like this one, and I guess that's it for the English. But other people like the Prussians get a lot more modifiers. But you can see your baseline stuff from the military screen and the technology screen. So on the technology screen, we can really see some of these basics. So we start with Tech 3. And you can hover over each of these things and see when the next upgrade comes. So for instance, we don't start with cannons. That comes at Tech 7, which I probably should have included a part with cannons, but you know what, that's okay. So we start with the Latin Medieval Infantry. The Latin Medieval Infantry have a infantry fire value of 0.35 and an infantry shock value of 0.5. And I'll talk about what this means in a second. The cavalry only have 1 shock value, which is twice as much as infantry, so that's fairly significant, although they don't have any fire. You also start with lane morale of 2.5, and as you can see, you get this. There's only a few big upgrades to it, but they are pretty major. You also start with combat width of +5. The base is 15, so that makes it so you have 20. Everyone starts with 20 unless you're a Native American, I believe. And later on, you get more. And you have tactics, and the tactics is something that just increases fairly consistently over the tech levels, and I'll talk about what that does as well. The flanking range as well is not as important and doesn't increase as quickly. Supply limit doesn't really affect directly your combat, but it affects how many troops you can have, and this is just your building. So anyway, so that's the basics of what we have here. These are like the base level statistics and stuff. In the military screen, you can see the same thing, like your base military tactics. You can see your land morale. You can see, so the base morale was, again, 2.5, but we actually have 2.8 because of our advisor that I hired, Morale of Armies dude, which is very important, and some power projection, army tradition, prestige. And those are you can hover over all this stuff on your own if you want to see kind of exactly what modifies it. There's a lot of modifiers that go into modifying things, which modify further things. But either way, your morale is going to be very important. You want to check this fairly frequently because it's really important to see this. The morale kind of determines basically how long your troops are willing to fight for, and that's a pretty important thing. There's like 2 parts of battle really. There's the damage that you do and the morale damage that you do, and the morale damage is equally important, if not more important. So before we do anything else, though, I do kind of want to show some combat. So we're gonna have a few battles probably throughout this war, so let's just not worry about it too much, and let's just go and attack. So, before we even engage, though, I do want to say, so we have combat width of 20, and you guys are going to see that when we engage, we're only going to have 20 troops, and one thing to keep in mind is that the terrain of the province does actually influence how many people can engage. Farmlands is like base, so it shouldn't affect us at all, but we'll see. So let's go. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get there on the 7th, And let's pause. So you can see this battle here going on, and you can see we have all of these troops here, and this is where you can see a lot of this stuff. You can see what's happening exactly. We have equal number of troops to them, equal number of regiments, but we do have more coming in 4 days. You can also see your base morale, or your total morale rather, your tactics, your discipline, which we'll talk about, and a whole bunch of other stuff. You can see the leader here, and yeah, so let's talk about this interface, because this is where you can actually see how well battles are going. First of all, battle is split up into 2 phases. You have your fire and your shock, kind of like we saw over here. There's fire and shock. It alternates, in each phase is 3 days. So you start off with fire, and I guess, I think that's to simulate, because, you fire at each other before you charge at each other, obviously, because it's ranged, So the fire phase goes first, and each phase is 3 days. So you have a 3-day, I think this just started, so we'll go down, to speed 2. So when we unpause, you'll see after 3 days, it'll switch to a shock phase, and you can see that right here in the middle. It says fire. You can see here is the combat width, which is determined by the farmland's terrain. The 20 combat width includes front and back. So that's so you can see we have 13 regiments, and there's 7 spots. So there's 20 in the front, 20 in the back. And the thing with this is that only front row units can attack the other enemy, except for cannons. Cannons can be in the back row and still attack, but they do half as much damage, and this is very interesting. But that's something to keep in mind, is that cannons can't do as much damage in the back row as they can in the front row, but in the front row they're very bad. You don't want them in the front row, because otherwise they'll get torn apart by cavalry and infantry, which kind of makes sense. So we're on the 7th of November, so I guess it's 7th, 8th, 9th, and then the 10th it'll switch over to a shock phase. So yeah, so you have the 3-day shock phase, or 3-day fire phase, and then the 3-day shock phase, and it keeps alternating until the battle's over. And every phase, you actually have a dice roll here, and this dice roll determines how much damage you do. This is kind of what determines the damage. For some reason, it's a 10-sided die, but for some reason they decided to go 0 to 9 instead of 1 to 10. I mean, I kind of understand why, but I don't know. There's just different reasons why, but it's interesting actually. Lots of the code for this game comes from EU3 and EU2, because the combat mechanics have kind of stayed the same, and they're similar to Victoria 2 if you played that game. CK2 and Hearts of Iron are a little bit different, but Victoria 2 kind of has similar combat mechanics to this. So yeah, so we rolled a 1, they rolled a 9. That's not too good for us, obviously. And you can see here the army composition. So we have identical armies in every way. We have cavalry, and we can't flank them really, because we have the equal amount of troops as them. However, when we go a couple days, we'll see that our troops are reinforced. So let's go ahead and see. It's good to keep in mind that we do have higher morale due to our advisor. But either way, we're going to go ahead and unpause. So the 8th, and so one thing I should mention is every day you can see the amount of losses that you've taken. So we lost 400, they lost 130. So we're obviously losing more than they are. However, look at their morale. Their morale is going down faster than ours. And why is that? Well, part of that is actually just because we have more morale, and the more morale you have, the more morale damage you do, which is a very interesting thing to realize. So that was 1 day. There's 2 days. So if I'm correct, it should re-roll tomorrow. So there we go. So now we've entered into a shock phase. The shock phase is where most of your damage is done in the early game. And remember, the reason for this is that the fire value is only, plus 0.35, whereas shock is a lot more for both types of units that we have at this stage in the game. So our morale hasn't changed except for our actual morale. Our max hasn't changed, obviously. That's not going to change in battle, really. It never really does that. But anyway, so you can see now we're in a shock phase. It re-rolled the dice again, so we rolled better this time. We also have this shock that's coming from our general, and that's one reason that generals are so important in EU4, is that generals, their fire and the shock values add directly onto the dice rolls. And it's interesting to note that we have a shock value of 4, but there's only adding 1. So why is that? Well, it's because this dude has a shock value of 3. So essentially, we've only, changed +1 compared to them. But that's still better than nothing. That's actually fairly significant. That increased our damage by, 12.5%, I guess, right? So that's pretty significant. And that's very, very good to get that. We have new troops coming in tomorrow, so let's go ahead and unpause again. So now we have a lot more troops in, and you can see they've actually filled in the back row, and the reason for this is that because they are in the back, or because they reinforce, they start in the back row. However, if we unpause again, the next day they've come in, and you have the infantry here actually can't do anything because they're on the outside, but the cavalry can. And this is something interesting, and this is kind of what we have here with this flanking range. When you further, like later in the game, when you get more flanking range, it's a lot easier to actually flank infantry or cavalry, but cavalry especially are really good at flanking, and they're able to kind of go in from the outside. And one of the ideal numbers to have is to have 3 cavalry on either outside. So like, for instance, when you're building an army, right now we have a total of 7 cavalry, and that might actually be one too many, because lots of times, at least in the early game, you only need like 3 cavalry on either side of the engagement, because that's about as far as they can reach naturally anyways. And later on that changes, but if you can have 3 cavalry as well as enough infantry to match theirs, that's a pretty good composition, because then you have 1-to-1 infantry and then your cavalry take over. Maybe even a little extra infantry, because it's always good to have a little to fill in the front lines. You can tell these guys over here, they're running a little lower on morale and stuff, but the regiment strength is down from 1,000, which is the base, of course. So either way, though, we're going to win this battle. I'm just going to let it keep ticking, and we can see here on this battle screen that we lost a lot less than them. We actually stack wiped them, which is insane. Stack wipes, if you don't know, I'm going to kind of pretend that this, anyone watching this guide is fairly new to the game, but if you don't know, stack wipe basically means that they didn't have enough morale to even be able to retreat in one piece, so they just completely got wiped off the face of the earth, and their units got overrun, essentially, like in Hearts of Iron 4, if you played that. It's the same thing. Either way, that was a pretty good engagement. So if you don't know the other stuff, I'm not really going to go into sieges in this. That's a different part of combat that I'm not really, I don't think is as important to cover necessarily. But that's basically going to like ensure us victory over the Scottish. The French, again, are going to destroy us, but we might not be able to see any more combat in this game. I'm going to try to engage them if I can, but for now, let's just not worry about it. So let me talk about some stuff that goes into these battles. So as you saw, we have our base fire and our base shock values, and you can see that on the military screen as well as on the tech screen, but it's a little bit easier to kind of see everything in the military screen here. We have our infantry fire, our infantry shock, and our cavalry shock, and obviously the cavalry are expensive in the early game, but they're also much better than infantry are individually. However, there is so you might think, why wouldn't we just have, all infantry, all cavalry in an army? Well, there's actually this thing called insufficient support, and where is it? Yeah, so there we go. So you cannot have more than 50% cavalry compared to your infantry in a battle, or you will suffer the insufficient support battle. Penalty in battle. Gosh darn it, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting my words out today. So basically what this means is, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but basically you can't have equal cavalry and infantry. No, okay, yeah. So basically you can only have as many cavalry as you have infantry in a battle, and I'll try to get into combat again if I can, to show you guys what I mean by this. But basically, you don't want to have more cavalry than you have infantry. And if you do, let me see if I can show this. If you do, you'll have this. You see this? You have this red. The number is redded out because you have more cavalry than you do infantry, and essentially this is very bad. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. Now that we have equal or higher, then it goes away, but you don't want to have more cavalry than you have infantry, because you get a very bad penalty to your cavalry combat ability when you do that. So that's something to keep in mind. It's actually determined by your tech group. So if you're actually an Eastern group, I think you can have 60%, so you can have like 20% more cavalry than infantry. If you're a horde, like a steppe group, a horde technology, nomadic tech group, you can actually, I believe, have like an army that's like 80% cavalry or something like that. There's some, but you can find this online. I'm gonna post a link to some of the wiki pages for this stuff. But yeah, either way, your tech group can determine it in a way that allows you to to have some good stuff happen there, and with a lot more ability to have a lot more cavalry, which is good. I'm gonna go and wipe out this navy. I'm not gonna talk about this because I don't. Navy combat is not really that important. Just have more boats. I'm focusing on land for this video. So, what is the other stuff that we need to worry about? Well, so when you're in battle, you have this infantry shock, your infantry fire, your cavalry shock, etc. Artillery, eventually, when you have artillery. And, this is kind of like the base value of damage you do. However, when we look at your infantry types, you actually have different types of infantry that you can choose that corresponds to your tech level, and these are ones that will unlock in the future. And so these are your pips, they're called. Your offensive morale pips, offensive shock pips, offensive fire pips. And these kind of as well determine the composition of your armies. I don't know how to explain exactly what these do, but this basically just kind of is a way to spec your army into different things. Note that if you switch from one to another, your morale actually goes down to 0 for all your infantry or whatever you're changing. So you don't want to do that when you're at war. It's a very bad idea. Your morale will suffer greatly, and then they'll smash you up and that stuff. So yeah. But basically, you have defensive and offensive pips, and this is a way that you can kind of spec your nation to do specific things. So for instance, if you want to be more defensive minded, if you know you're going to be attacked constantly and not attacking constantly, you're going to want to have defensive pips. Not only that, but morale pips are very good, because morale basically just, again, increases your morale, which increases how long you can fight, which also increases how much morale damage you do, which makes it so that they can fight less time, which, you know, is good, because then you end battles quicker, you do more damage, you lose less troops yourself, etc., etc. It's just better to have more morale. Morale is very, very important. It's like organization in Victoria 2 or Hearts of Iron. So yeah. And so you can see, though, you can kind of spec your nation in different ways. Eventually, in the next set, you actually get more options. And normally, I go for ones that have more morale pips. And then from there, I go for ones that have, after that, if it's equal, I go for ones that have more defensive pips. Because I like to take defensive engagements in generally. But anyway, so that's like kind of the other thing that is the base determination of how much damage you do in which categories, whether it be morale, shock, or infantry fire. And the same thing goes for cavalry as well. You have different things, and you can choose that as well. I'm not going to change anything because the base ones are pretty good. You can see your cost per month, you can see your combat ability and other stuff, which we'll get to in a sec, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Naval stuff as well, which again, I don't really focus on naval stuff that much. So I guess I'll talk about this. The infantry combat ability is really good. As you can see, combat ability is just a flat increase to the amount of damage your units do in every way. So it's super, super, super important to get infantry combat ability and cavalry combat ability and artillery combat ability if you can. And it's hard to do this. It's actually one of the harder things in the game, but you can get that through like quality. Gives you, by the end, you get 10% combat ability in every category. And stuff like that can be really important. So it's good to keep that in mind when going for idea groups. I believe, like, let's see, aristocratic has cavalry combat ability and stuff. You have, let's see, what else do you have? Offensive, maybe? I don't remember, but there's certain ones that add combat ability and stuff. But it's really good to get combat ability. It's super, super important. Lots of times, certain nations have ideas that add that, like the Brandenburgian / Prussian people might, I think. I don't remember. Is there a way to see that? I don't think there is. But either way, it's really important to get combat ability. A similar modifier to combat ability is your discipline. So you can see what it says. I'm not going to read that whole description, but basically, discipline is just a damage multiplier. And it also reduces your damage taken. And so discipline is similar to combat ability, but might even be better. Actually, it probably is, because it applies to everything. So it's really good. Discipline is super, super important as well. We do get a discipline thing from an ID group, so further down the line, our troops would be pretty good there. By the way, we are going to have the War Roses eventually, but I'm not going to play this long enough. Occupy Paris. I've never seen that. Interesting. Either way, yeah, so that's a good example of some of the, and those are some of the modifiers that are very important to how much damage you do and take. Another important modifier is military tactics. Again, this is just the only way to get tactics, I believe, is to get it through tech. So that's why, one reason why tech is important, because in the long run, tactics are super, super important. All that tactics do is they are just a flat increase or decrease to the damage you take. They reduce the damage you take, and it's just a flat decrease to the damage you take, like a multiplier. It's super, super important because you spend less manpower in each battle, you know, and you take less damage in general. I believe it also applies to morale damage. I'm not sure about that. Which basically means your troops can fight longer and take less damage, which means you can fight more. It's super, super important in every way. Siege ability and defensiveness, all this stuff is, this stuff influences your sieges. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Again, land morale is pretty good. Army tradition, it increases your morale, your manpower recovery speed, recover army or morale speed, but it doesn't really increase or directly impact your combat. But yeah, so this is basically all the general modifiers you're going to see. Combat ability, super important again for dealing more damage and stuff. Discipline, deal more damage, take less damage. Military tactics, reduce the damage taken, and that's in terms of like numbers and stuff. It's super, super important. And the combat width, again, combat width just increases the number of spots in a row that can be be fought in. And so that's pretty important. I think before, I'm not playing this campaign. This is not an actual campaign. So I believe what I'm going to go ahead and do is see if I can't... I'm just going to abandon the siege, and we're going to go fight the French one more time, because I do just want to get some more, you know, stuff going, some more battles going to show you guys. So, let's go ahead and make a customized army. So first of all, what we should do is, if you don't know, a good button when you're about to go into battle is to Shift Consolidate. If you hold Shift, it puts everything into 1,000 regiments and leaves the remainder with 0 or the, you know, however many they need to. And this is really good because you'd rather have every regiment that's fighting at full morale and then a few at 0 that just don't fight at all, than have like a bunch that are at 90% strength. So we're gonna go ahead. We have 18 transports, so that's as many as we're gonna be able to get. We want to again take 3 cavalry, 3 cavalry for each side, which is 6 total. Of course. So 6 cavalry, and that means we can take 12 infantry. That's pretty good. So this will be our whole line. We're going to take this one unit. We're going to put a Richard Plantagenet, which is he's a decent general, so we'll do that. We'll come down here to Caen. They have a 4-4-1-3, so that's pretty good. I will talk about some other stuff in a second before we end this video. So let's look at this. So the last thing I have to talk about is when we engage, there's the dice rolls, and the things that modify it are, well, there's just the base dice roll, then you have your general that adds on, and the other thing I should talk about is terrain. Terrain and river crossings and strait crossings. These are the other things that can increase or decrease your effectiveness in fighting them. These again are just like dice rolls that determine the base amount of damage, that you're dealing, and are then modified by all your other values. So it's really important to have a good base attack. So what are those things that I just said? Well, terrain is one. Grasslands is a normal terrain. Farmlands is a normal terrain. It's flat, in other words, it doesn't have any modifier. But there's a lot of stuff that you're going to face that will give the defender a bonus. And you can go to simple terrain, and I love this map, but I keep it right here at Q because it's very important. You can see all this light green and stuff. That's grasslands and farmlands, right? So that stuff is good to attack into if you have to attack into anything. This darker green is woods. Woods grants the defender a +1 to every dice roll. So it's super, super valuable to have a defensive bonus if you can get one. This down here, this orangish sort of thing, which you can see in Scotland, that would probably be where it affect us in the near future. The orangish one is hills or highlands. Highlands in Scotland, like the Scottish Highlands, you know. And Highlands also give the defender a +1 advantage. And so you can imagine that's kind of like hills, which makes sense. What is this? So you might ask, well, this is hills. This is again, a +1 to the defender. You also have this sort of thing here with it's like a tealish color, and that's marsh. Marsh is also a +1 advantage to the defender. So you can see there's a lot of like stuff around that'll give the defender a +1 bonus, and that's always to the defender, and it cannot be counteracted by anything. There's no way to get around it. These dark ones over here are mountains, and I believe mountains are the only way to get a +2 terrain advantage to the defender. But yeah, mountains give a 2 roll advantage to the defender. So mountains, if you can defend in mountains, it's huge, and you never want to attack into mountains. It's really, really, really a bad idea to attack into mountains unless you are super confident in your army's abilities. But yeah, so marsh, forest, highlands, all that is +1 to the defender. Mountains are +2. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is river crossings, and on the simple terrain map mode, you can see very clearly where there's rivers between provinces. You can normally kind of tell on the main map as well, like, you know, we are going to go over that river if we attack them. And the thing with rivers is that basically rivers are a +1 to the defender as well. If you attack from the sea, from transports directly onto land, like an amphibious landing, it gives the defender a +2, similar if you were to come from the mountains. So, and keep in mind that that can actually stack. So if you attack into mountains or highlands plus from the sea, you're going to get like a -3 or a -4 to your attack. Well, technically it's adding to their attack. It's not taking away from yours, which does make a small difference, but normally it's worse for you if you're fighting against France or someone who has better base than you anyways. Either way, basically, you don't want to attack across rivers. You definitely don't want to attack from the sea if you don't have to. And you don't want to attack into defensive terrain. You would rather take a fight when you're in defensive terrain. However, unlike with terrain, there is a way to counteract river crossings and strait crossings. If your leader, if your general here, has more maneuver, which is this value right here, you have, you know, your fire and your shock. But if you have your maneuver here, and this is your siege, by the way, increases your siege, so I'm just going to put that out there. But this is maneuver. And maneuver, the maneuver pips that you have, if they are higher than the defending general, you will counteract the river or the strait crossing. I believe with strait crossings, there's still a chance you get it anyways. And I'm not sure if that's the case with rivers, but there's some weirdness there that they kind of have switched around between different patches. But yeah, but if you have more more maneuver, you can actually sometimes counteract the river or the strait crossing penalties. Maneuver does not actually account for terrain penalties though, so keep that in mind. So without further ado, let's go ahead and attack again and get another battle in here before we end this little tutorial guide thing. So we're gonna attack, and so you can hover over this and see England may get crossing penalty. So we might have a penalty. That's what it's saying. We may get a crossing penalty if you're across the river. However, we have higher maneuver than the defending general, so it should not happen. And so there we are. So the battle's happened. Look at this. We have no modifier for river crossing. Their general does have a lot more fire than us. We have a lot more. We have equal shock actually. And it's really good to keep in mind that your infantry, your base infantry fire and shock values determine how much damage is done. So fire isn't that important. Shock is much more important in the early game. It's just that we start with fire. So yeah, so you can see we actually have more morale than them from our army tradition, our power projection, our advisor. We do have some. They actually are flanking us a little bit, just because they have more troops. But we have kind of the ideal setup. It would have been good if we had one more infantry. We could actually go ahead and get some more troops to bring in here. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But, ooh, look at this. So we just switched to the shock phase. We rolled a 9. They rolled a 6. So you can see every day we lose 1,000. They lose a little more than us. So we're doing okay there. But it looks like they might actually win. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. Let's see. The next fire phase, we rolled a 8. They rolled a 4 total. So that's pretty good. We're going to do more damage. Of course, look, the damage is not that much. Oh, and then they rolled an 8 to our 8. They actually, oh, you know what I realized? Look at this. They have more discipline, which is why they're actually doing a lot more damage to us than we are to them with every tick, even though we have an equal dice roll. So you can see there's a lot of modifiers that kind of go into making your troops do better or worse. We're going to go ahead and see if we can't rush some troops over here. They might not make it. But the other thing is, can we see... Oh, yeah, so here's the other thing. If this has a plus, that's how you know that you're not getting the cavalry, you know, the insufficient support modifier for having more cavalry than you have infantry. If it's a minus there, then that's how you'll know if you're not getting that. Where can you see the... I don't know if you can actually see in battle how much combat ability they have, but you'll kind of be able to tell based on how well you're doing. So they rolled a 9 in the fire phase, which sucks. They might win. When are you going to be there? Yeah, they're probably going to win. So we both rolled a 9 the shock. But of course, because they have more discipline, they're going to be doing more damage and stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, so that's basically kind of the basics of the combat. This has been a longer guide than normal. That's okay. I really like getting down to the nitty-gritty with combat. It's very important. And this is a kind of a comprehensive guide that I hope helps you when determining how to make your armies work. So obviously, we lost that battle. Don't expect me, like, don't, you know, you can, if you want, you can say, oh, you lost, so I should listen to you. But, like, I have at least a little bit of knowledge in this game, and I'm not trying to, like, tell you guys that I know everything. I do not, but I do know the basics, and it's served me pretty well in the past. So just, you know, kind of keep in mind your modifiers and stuff. And this is the basics. This you can, you know, take it with a grain of salt, because I've never done a world conquest or anything, but I've done some pretty good games, and I normally am okay at getting my army composition up to par. But you know, if you don't want to listen to me, that is fine, and I understand. But yeah, that's the basics. Hopefully this guide does help you in understanding the combat mechanics. Again, you can look at everything in the text screen, you can look at everything in the military screen, and that's a good way to kind of see exactly when you get the next bonuses, when you get these improvements. Cannons come at Tech 7. You can hover over to see when you get the next level of, like, options for your troops here. And yeah, so it's pretty self-explanatory once you just kind of hover over some modifiers, but it does take some time to explain and understand. So thank you guys for watching. Go leave a like and subscribe for more. Hopefully this guide helps you in your conquests. Helps you in beating up the Scottish as the English, beating up the Burgundians as the French, beating up the Aragonese as the Castilians, whatever you may do. I hope it helps you. So thank you guys for watching. Go leave a like and subscribe for more. If you want to see more guides, tell me what you'd like to see. I always like to do more guides, but I just don't have enough ideas. So thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video, whatever I do. Goodbye.